Most of us grow up absorbing a very quiet idea, almost invisible because it's everywhere. That if we're patient enough, good enough, talented enough, someone will notice. A teacher, a manager, a partner, a system. That moment when the door opens and life finally starts, it's a comforting story. It keeps us calm. It keeps us waiting. And that's the problem. The myth of rescue doesn't arrive loudly. It shows up disguised as hope. It's hope. Just hang in there. Your time will come. Someone will give you a chance. And while hope can be fuel, passive hope is a sedative. It convinces capable people to sit on the sidelines of their own lives, to delay action until conditions feel safer, clearer, more certain. But certainty never arrives first. Action does. Look around and you'll notice something uncomfortable. The people who build meaningful things didn't wait to be chosen. They chose themselves before anyone else did. They didn't have a roadmap. They didn't have permission. Most of the time, they didn't even know if it would work. They moved anyway. Not because they were fearless, but because waiting felt more dangerous than trying. We're taught that struggle means something is wrong, that if it's hard, we must be doing it wrong. So we pause, we reassess, we look for reassurance, we ask for validation, and slowly years pass. The cost of waiting isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It's the quiet erosion of momentum, the slow shrinking of ambition, the normalization of a maybe later. The truth is, no one is scanning the horizon looking for you. Not because you don't matter, but because everyone else is absorbed in their own survival, their own doubts, their own unfinished plans. That realization can feel cold at first, but it's also the most freeing insight you'll ever have. Because once you stop expecting rescue, you stop being disappointed by its absence. This is where power begins. Not the loud kind. The grounded kind. The moment you accept that the responsibility is yours. Not as a burden, but as a privilege. When you realize that waiting to be saved is just another way of avoiding the risk of choosing. Choosing to fail publicly. Choosing to look foolish. Choosing to move without applause. Progress has never been built by people who waited to feel ready. Readiness is a byproduct of motion. You don't gain clarity by standing still. You gain it by engaging reality, by colliding with problems, by adjusting course in real time. That's how systems improve. That's how people evolve. So, if you're waiting for the call, the sign, the green light, this is it. No one is coming, and that means the next move is yours. There comes a moment, quiet, often inconvenient, when the story you've been telling yourself stops working. The story that says once things settle down, once you have more time, more confidence, more resources, then you'll begin. That moment doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with frustration, with restlessness, with the feeling that you're busy but not moving. That's the fantasy breaking. At first it feels like loss, because letting go of the idea that someone or something will eventually make it easier means facing reality as it is. No guarantees, no safety net perfectly timed to catch you. Just you, your ideas, and a world that doesn't slow down to make space for them. Most people experience this moment and retreat. They call it burnout. They call it bad luck. They call it a sign to wait longer. But it's none of those things. It's an invitation. When the fantasy breaks, you're forced to see something clearly. Waiting hasn't been protecting you. It's been limiting you. The discomfort you feel isn't evidence that you're failing. It's proof that you've outgrown the old script. Growth always begins as friction. Systems don't evolve in comfort. Neither do people. This is where many stop, because it's the first point where responsibility becomes unavoidable. You can no longer blame timing or permission or missing information. The question becomes simpler and harder at the same time. If nothing external changes, what will you change? That question is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. But it's also powerful because it hands control back to you. You start to understand that clarity is overrated. No one ever had a complete picture before starting anything meaningful. They had a direction and a willingness to adjust. You don't need certainty to move forward. You need tolerance for ambiguity. You need to be okay acting on 60% of the information, knowing you'll correct the rest along the way. This is also the moment you realize how much energy you've been spending managing fear instead of building momentum. In the beer, when the fantasy breaks, it becomes visible. And once it's visible, it's workable. You stop asking, what if this fails? And start asking, what will I learn if it does? That shift changes everything. The fantasy promised safety. Reality offers something better, progress. Not instant success, not applause, but forward motion. And forward motion compounds faster than comfort ever could. When the illusion finally collapses, it's not the end of hope. It's the beginning of ownership. Because the moment you stop waiting for the world to change is the moment you start changing it. Once you accept that no one is coming and the fantasy is gone, something interesting happens. The weight shifts. At first, responsibility feels heavy, almost unfair. Why should it all be on you? The system isn't perfect. The rules aren't equal. Circumstances aren't neutral. All of that is true. And still, responsibility is the only place where leverage exists. Explains things without demanding change. It gives you a story where the outcome isn't your fault, but it also quietly removes your ability to influence that outcome. The moment you assign full responsibility to something outside yourself, you surrender control. And control, even partial control, is the most valuable resource you have. Taking responsibility doesn't mean pretending the world is fair. It means deciding that fairness is irrelevant to progress. Physics doesn't care if a rocket launch is fair. It responds to inputs, constraints, and execution. Life works the same way. You assess the environment honestly, accept the constraints, and then you ask the only question that matters. Given reality as it is, what action moves this forward? This is why responsibility is not a burden, but a doorway. When you stop saying this happened to me and start saying this is mine to deal with, you regain the ability to iterate. You can test, fail, adjust, and try again. That loop is freedom. It's the same mechanism that drives innovation. Ownership creates speed. There's also a deeper shift that happens here. When you take responsibility, you stop waiting for motivation. Motivation is unreliable. It spikes and disappears. Responsibility is stable. It shows up even when energy is low, even when confidence hasn't caught up yet. You act because the outcome matters, not because you feel ready. People often confuse responsibility with self-blame. They are not the same. Self-blame says, I am the problem. Responsibility says, I am the solution. One is paralyzing, the other is activating. Responsibility allows you to be honest about mistakes without being defined by them. Errors become data. Setbacks become feedback. This is where real confidence is built. Not from affirmations, not from external praise, but from keeping promises to yourself. Every time you take ownership and follow through, you reinforce a simple truth. You can be trusted. And self-trust scales. It compounds into courage, into resilience, into the willingness to tackle bigger problems. Once you step into responsibility, life stops feeling like something that's happening to you and starts feeling like something you're building. You may not control every variable, but you control the next decision. And the next decision is where momentum lives. Responsibility doesn't weigh you down. It lifts you up by giving you something solid to stand on. Once responsibility becomes yours, a new tension appears. You start to see the difference between what feels good now and what actually moves you forward. Comfort is subtle. It doesn't announce itself as a problem. It looks like stability, routines, reasonable choices. It tells you you're being sensible. But comfort has a hidden cost. It keeps your world small enough to manage. Agency is different. Agency is the willingness to choose action even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. It's the decision to step into uncertainty without knowing how it ends. Comfort asks, how do I stay safe? Agency asks, what is possible? Those questions lead to very different lives. Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They stall because they optimize for comfort. They wait for the plan that removes risk, the version of the future where nothing can go wrong. But that future doesn't exist. Progress has always required operating beyond the edge of certainty. Every meaningful leap, personal or technological, started as an uncomfortable bet. Choosing agency means accepting that discomfort is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. When you're stretching into something new, your nervous system reacts. Doubt shows up. Resistance shows up. That doesn't mean you're off track. It means you're expanding your capacity. Growth feels unstable because it is. Comfort keeps you busy. Agency makes you effective. You can spend years refining, planning, preparing, and still avoid the one decision that actually changes things. Agency collapses that delay. It turns intention into movement. And movement creates feedback. Feedback creates learning. Learning creates progress. There's also a social cost to agency that people rarely talk about. When you choose uncertainty, you may disappoint others. You may step outside expectations. You may look unreasonable for a while. Comfort keeps you approved. Agency risks misunderstanding. But approval has never been a reliable indicator of direction. Innovation often looks irrational before it looks inevitable. This is where self-respect starts to matter more than reassurance. When you act from agency, you align your behavior with your values instead of your fears. You stop asking whether something will make you comfortable and start asking whether it will make you proud. That shift changes your internal compass. Agency doesn't mean reckless action. It means informed courage. You evaluate risks, you prepare as best you can, and then you move anyway. You accept that some variables will only reveal themselves after you begin. That's not careless. Over time, something powerful happens. The discomfort you once avoided becomes familiar, not pleasant but manageable, and with that familiarity comes confidence. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind that knows it can navigate uncertainty again. Comfort offers safety without growth. Agency offers growth with risk. One keeps you contained. The other lets you evolve. If you want a different future, you have to choose agency over comfort, every single time. After you choose agency over comfort, there's still one thing missing, not motivation, not confidence, trust. And this is where most people get it backward. They think self-trust is something you discover first, like a hidden resource, and then you act. But self-trust is built only after you move. It's an output, not an input. Early on, you won't feel ready. You'll question your judgment. You'll replay decisions in your head, looking for certainty that doesn't exist. That's normal. Self-trust doesn't come from knowing you'll succeed. It comes from knowing you can respond when things don't go as planned. And that knowledge is earned through experience, not intention. Every time you take action without guarantees, you're running a quiet experiment. You're collecting data about yourself. Can I handle pressure? Can I adapt? Can I recover from mistakes? Each attempt, whether it works or not, adds evidence. Over time, the evidence compounds into belief. Not belief in outcomes, but belief in your ability to navigate them. This is why failure is such an important teacher. When things go wrong and you don't collapse, something shifts internally. You realize the fear was exaggerated. The consequences were survivable. The recovery was possible. That realization builds a kind of confidence that can't be shaken by uncertainty, because it was forged inside it. Self-trust also changes how you relate to external validation. Praise becomes information, not fuel. Criticism becomes signal, not identity. You're no longer dependent on approval to keep moving. You listen, you adjust, but you don't stall. The center of gravity moves inward. There's a discipline to this. You don't wait for inspiration. You show up. You keep small promises to yourself. You do the work even when it's inconvenient, even when no one is watching. Those moments matter more than the big wins, because they quietly reinforce integrity. You start to see yourself as someone who follows through. And that identity shapes future behavior. This process isn't dramatic. It's incremental, but it's powerful. Over time, decisions become faster. That has less influence. You don't need to eliminate fear. You just stop letting it drive. You've proven repeatedly that you can operate with fear in the room. And no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a threat. It feels like a familiar environment. You trust your ability to learn in motion, to correct course, to endure discomfort. That trust is what allows you to take on bigger challenges, not because they're easy, but because you know you can adapt. Self-trust isn't something you find by looking inward. It's something you build by moving forward anyway. At some point, after you've stopped waiting, accepted uncertainty, taken responsibility, chosen agency, and built self-trust, something fundamental changes in how you see your life. You no longer experience it as a sequence of reactions. It starts to feel authored. Not perfectly controlled, not free of chaos, but intentional. You're no longer just responding to what happens. You're deciding what happens next. Most people live inside scripts they didn't write. Expectations handed down by culture, family, economics, fear. They follow paths that feel reasonable, respectable, safe. And one day they wake up successful on paper but disconnected from meaning. Authorship begins when you question the script. When you ask whether the goals you're chasing actually belong to you. Becoming the author of your life doesn't mean inventing a fantasy version of yourself. It means editing honestly, deciding what stays, what goes, and what needs a rewrite. Some chapters end abruptly. Some characters don't come with you. That's not failure, that's coherence. A life makes sense when the actions align with the values, even if the path looks unconventional. Authorship also means accepting that the story will include setbacks. Every real narrative does, but setbacks change meaning when you're the one writing. They're no longer interruptions, they're plot points. They create tension, contrast, depth. They give the eventual outcome weight. Without struggle, there's no story worth telling. This is where long-term thinking starts to matter. Authors don't write for the next page alone. They write for the arc. Might write for the arc. When you think in arcs, short-term discomfort becomes easier to tolerate. You stop asking, is this easy? And start asking, but does this move the story forward? That perspective changes decisions at every level. You also stop waiting for external permission to define success. You set your own metrics. Progress becomes personal, not comparative. You're no longer distracted by someone else's timeline because you're committed to your own trajectory. That focus is rare, and it's powerful. There's responsibility here too. You can't blame the story if you're the author. You have to own the direction. But that ownership is exactly what gives the story meaning. A life without authorship is predictable. A life with authorship is alive. Eventually, you look back and realize something important. The moment no one came to save you wasn't a loss. It was the inciting incident. The point where the story actually began. Everything after that was written with intention. No one came to save you. So you became the one who writes what happens next.